Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. And we're glad to have you here at the first virtual Cerm Town Hall. We're thrilled to have you join us and look forward to sharing some of the exciting updates on which our staff has been tirelessly working since the passage of Prop 14 last November. And we also look forward to hearing from you and how Cerm could further facilitate your research and education needs. Before I get started, I just wanted to give you a quick glance of what is happening on the agenda today. So as you can see here, you'll be hearing from a number of us in the first hour of the program, but I do want to emphasize that this is a bi-directional conversation. And while it is our goal to provide you with information and clarity about CIRM's program announcements and strategic concepts, it's even more important for us to hear your questions, your thoughts, and comments. And so to ensure that all your voices are being heard, those of you who are joining us through the webinar, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout the program. There are a few of our wonderful Cerm staff who are diligently watching the Q&A box, and they'll be communicating any major patterns to me and the rest of the team and answering any quick and easy questions. But we will also be collecting all the questions, compiling and addressing them, and then sending back an email within the next week to all the participants with our responses or to follow up in any event. To those of you who are joining with audio and video, these are the California Research and Education leaders. You can also use the Q&A feature throughout the program, but you will also be given the opportunity to ask questions live, and you can do that in the second hour of the program. I'll provide more detail when we reach that segment, but just to keep us on track with time, please refrain from unmuting yourself during the first part. Also, as a reminder, sorry, before we go on, this session is being recorded, so it will become available on demand on Cerm's YouTube after the event, in case any of you would like to watch it. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Chairman of the ICOC, Dr. Jonathan Thomas, who will be covering the most significant changes brought by Prop 14. JT, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mitra, and I would like to join in welcoming all of you. We are delighted to have the opportunity to be speaking to you about the new elements of CIRM and are, of course, very grateful to the voters of California for making all of this possible. I'm going to do a quick review of a number of the new elements of Prop 14 that are above and beyond what was in Prop 71, so that we can sort of set the table for further presentation and discussion later in the session. So Mitra, if you could start. First slide, please. Okay, so as you may recall, Prop 14 was a bit of a nail biter. The measure did garner an incredible number of votes. You see that, over 8.5 million. It did, however, take 10 days after Election Day to actually be able to say that it had over 50% of the vote. But we were in good shape all the way through there. It never got below 51% at any point in time. And we, of course, were delighted with what is a huge win for patients in California, nationally, and the world. The proposition, as you know, authorized $5.5 billion in new GEO bond money to use for CIRM awards and admin. For those of you who don't know, just a 2-second diversion here, every 6 months, CIRM determines what we believe will be the needs for the next 6 months in terms of outlay, both in research and admin. We talked to the Department of Finance and the governor's office about that to arrive at an agreement for that number. They then notify the state treasurer, who includes CIRM in his or her semi-annual bond issuance on behalf of all state agencies. Bond proceeds are then held by the state controller, and we request them over the 6 months as we need them and get disbursements. And that system has been in place ever since the beginning of Prop 71 and has worked very, very well. The measure makes a number of substantive and technical changes to Prop 71 and imposes a variety of new requirements with respect to the allocation of the $5.5 billion. Next slide, please. So there are a number of changes. Those noted, the first 5 in red or orange. I'm a little red-green colorblind, so I'm not sure what that is exactly, but those are the ones I would like to highlight here. Starting with establishing new programs, establishing treatments and cures, accessibility and affordability working group, expanding the scope of research, allocating $1.5 billion to diseases of the brain and central nervous system, and expanding the size of the board and dealing with processes for removal of members if that issue ever arises. In addition, just briefly note that the measure also makes governance and administrative changes. Next slide, please. Makes changes to the review process, requires a review of the accountability requirements and adoption of standards, allocates funding for research, admin, and facilities, has a section on key bond terms, and earmarks royalties that will be received down the road for access and affordability. Next slide, please. Okay, with respect to the new programs, number 1, it expands the Alpha Stem Cell Clinics program and creates satellite alpha clinics, if you will, in the form of community care centers of excellence. Next, it creates training and fellowship programs. Some of those are a reflection of like programs that existed back in the early days of Prop 71. It reestablishes shared labs programs, also a reflection of what we had early on, and it allocates specific facilities funding for community care centers of excellence and shared labs. Next slide, please. With respect to accessibility and affordability, this is obviously a very important matter with the field of regenerative medicine in early to midlife, more in midlife, I guess now, and a number of products working their way through the research continuum. We will start seeing more and more products being made available to the market, and issues of accessibility and affordability to all citizens of California, particularly in underserved communities, are going to be very key and require a lot of thought. Towards that end, we have set up, or in the process of setting up, this working group to deal with those issues, which will involve myself, Senator Art Torres, who is chairing this working group, 5 other members of our board, 10 other outside members who bring different expertise in the subject matter to bear, plus up to 15 new members of the CIRM team, all dealing with these issues. We're in the process of filling out the 10 outside members, and once that happens, we'll convene the group. Senator Torres will address all of the issues that will be attendant on that. And then, of course, as I noted, the measure allocated research funding for accessibility and affordability. Next slide, please. On the scope of research, there were some new things included. One is it includes genetic research in the scope of CIRM funding. It defines the term stem cell discovery research to include genetic research, making it automatically within scope. And I'll just add, I'm sure there would be questions on what comes under the heading of genetic research, and that's something that the team is in the process of working out at this point. It authorizes the board to make awards across the full research spectrum, including awards for therapy delivery. Authorizes the board to designate a research category as a vital research opportunity by majority vote. You may recall the vital research opportunity was part of Prop 71, but was used very sparingly, I believe twice, in the entire time that the original $3 billion was being deployed. Here, examples of VROs include personalized medicine and aging as a pathology. Next slide, please. Specifically, the measure pays special attention to diseases of the brain and the central nervous system and allocates no less than $1.5 billion to that research. I should note, by the way, that under Prop 71, we had about, give or take, 30% of the research dollars go to neurological conditions. So this $1.5 billion as a function of the $5.5 billion is not far off that, but the measure wanted to specifically carve it out to emphasize the importance of these types of conditions, and as we all know, are very difficult and are going to require a great deal of additional work. The measure identifies diseases and conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, dementia, epilepsy, schizophrenia, depression, traumatic brain injury, brain cancer, and autism. It's not necessarily exclusive to that. That's just an indicative list. It authorizes the board to make, again, awards across the research spectrum, including research, therapy development, and therapy delivery. And it specifies that the $1.5 billion includes the pro rata share of grant oversight and general admin costs. Next slide, please. Lastly, just wanted to say a word about the board. As you know, we had originally 29 members under Proposition 71. Because there were several categories of members that we felt would be helpful to add to the team. The measure includes 2 new UC appointments, which are UC Riverside and UCSF Fresno Clovis. 2 nurses, we did not have nurses on the board originally, with clinical trial and or stem cell or genetic therapy delivery experience. And 2 additional patient advocates for mental health that, among other things, is a further reflection of the emphasis placed in the proposition on diseases of the brain. And it also has a provision in there allowing for removal of board members if, as I said, that turns out to be an issue that is of concern. So that briefly summarizes some of the more notable additions that Prop 14 has put in place. The team, as you will hear, is busily at work on the strategic plan that's going to be implementing all of these changes, which Dr. Milan will speak to later in the presentation. And the board is very actively engaged in all of this. I will say, as an aside, as we all know, with everybody being sort of grounded by the pandemic, it's been a great opportunity for board participation on all aspects of things that require board attention, and we are very enthusiastic, speaking on behalf of the board, about what the future holds here under Prop 14 and the opportunity to work with all of you to take what is already an unparalleled collection of work throughout the state and to help enable further work so that you may continue to derive treatments and cures for patients with unmet medical needs. So thank you very much. And with that, Mitra, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Thomas. We will now turn it over to Dr. Sombrano, who will be discussing the current open program announcements, their eligibility and their scope. And I'll stop sharing my screen, Dr. Sombrano, so that you can share yours and drive the slides.
Okay, thank you very much, Mitra. Let me just share my slides here. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. As was mentioned before, we really appreciate your participation in this town hall, and we hope that we can provide information on everything that we're doing that will be helpful to you. So I'm going to just provide an introduction to our funding opportunities that we currently have, as well as an overview of our review process. And in general, we divide our funding opportunities into 5 basic categories: discovery, translation, and clinical, which form the core of our research support, particularly the therapy development pipeline. And then we also support infrastructure programs that include core laboratories and other similar elements in support of the research, and education, which covers a lot of our training programs that range from high school through clinical fellows. And we, oh, hold on a second, there we go. And we relaunched back in January following the passage of Prop 71, these core development programs, so that we could quickly restart CIRM and have these available to investigators and continue our push of scientific endeavors in this arena. And we created these based on the same principle that we had in the past of having predictable and recurring opportunities that would allow projects to enter at any phase along the development pipeline, from establishing a new idea, taking it to identify a single product candidate through discovery work, supporting translation work, which could lead you to a pre-IND meeting or equivalent, and then finally into our clinical program to support filing of an IND and or conducting of a clinical trial. And so since January, we've been issuing those. The clinical program 12 times a year, so basically a deadline at the end of each month. Our translation program offered 3 times per year, and our candidate discovery program twice a year. And so those programs continue our support of stem cell and progenitor cell-based projects. And as you may already be familiar, we support stem cells pretty broadly, including cell therapy development from human embryonic stem cell to other stem cell types. We also support projects that are directly studying stem cells in some way, such as mechanisms of differentiation, or perhaps using them as a tool, such as in a disease in a dish model. We support directly reprogrammed cell projects, and also small molecules or other biologics that act on or depend on those stem cells. And as was mentioned by Chairman Thomas, the genetic research or gene therapy is now an extension of our scope. So this means we allow projects in gene therapy that aren't necessarily tied to a stem cell or progenitor cell. However, we do still require that they have a regenerative medicine element to them. And also, as mentioned, we are continuing to think hard about defining the genetic research and gene therapy to be broad enough to capture projects that are out there. A little bit about the application review process. This is just a diagram to illustrate that applications that come to us across all of these programs go through essentially the same 3 basic phases. When we receive applications, they are assessed for eligibility by the CIRM team. We look to make sure that the applications are complete and that they meet all the requirements that are laid out in the respective RFA or program announcement. And then those applications that are accepted for review then go on to a merit review by our grants working group, or GWG. And this is where we determine whether the application has scientific merit. Recommendations come out of that review panel and go to our board, or a subcommittee of our board that makes the final funding decisions. They also take into account other factors such as our overall portfolio, our strategic plan, and general fit into the overall mission of CIRM. And just to expand a little bit more on our grants working group, this is the body that is responsible for evaluating the scientific merit of all the applications that come to CIRM and to provide those recommendations to our board. This group is composed of 15 scientific members who are external to California and 7 patient advocate or nurse members of our board. And that group, along with the chair of the ICOC, who functions in an ex officio capacity on the panel, evaluates all the proposals across all the pillars. And as a result, we assemble expert panels that are specific to meet the needs of each review type. So as you can imagine, we don't rely just on 15 scientific members. We have a pool that we draw from, which is currently about 250 to 300 members. And it's something that we are growing and expanding in order to cover all the different areas that of expertise that may be needed. So for example, we obviously have a lot of folks that are experts in stem cell biology or in cell therapy, both clinicians and basic scientists, but also experts in manufacturing, regulatory affairs, product development, translational research, and other areas as needed as we also develop our programs. We draw different individuals with different and diverse expertise to assemble these panels into an appropriate one for the cohort of applications that we have. So we may assemble a discovery panel that includes a variety of experts that have different backgrounds and provide those different but relevant expertise to that review. The review criteria that is utilized by these panels in general are summarized in these 5 questions. There are clearly some more specifics that pertain to each of the different opportunity types, but just from a high level, it boils down to these 5 questions. 1, does the project hold the necessary significance and potential for impact? Meaning, what kind of value does this project offer? Is it something that is worth doing? Is the rationale sound? Meaning, is this something that practically makes sense? Does it have the data to support what they intend to do? Is it well planned and designed? Is the project feasible? Meaning, do they have the appropriate team, resources, and budget to carry it out? And finally, does the project address the needs of the underserved? And this 5th element is a new one that we added this year. And it follows on the heels of our efforts to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion in the assessment of all the applications that come through CIRM. And so we are still at the phase where we are introducing this into the review and application process. And so one of the first steps was to add that review criterion for both the GWG and the ICOC to evaluate the scientific elements. And for example, this will come into play with enrollment and outreach plans and clinical trials as is applicable for our clinical program, or incorporation of diversity into the research design in some of the other applications. And those are considered and become part of the overall score of the project, as well as commented upon in the critiques. Now, in addition, how it is that applicants incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly is also part of the application. Here we're talking about the team's track record and overall plans to include DEI are going to be considered by our grants working group board members, so our patient advocate and nurse members. And those recommendations are also going to be forwarded to our board. And so a little bit more on the addressing the needs of the underserved, which really is the basis of our 5th review criterion. So this is just the example that I'm drawing from our clinical program where we are utilizing it. And so some of these questions are related to, as I mentioned, outreach and study participation by underserved and disproportionately affected populations, whether the proposal provides an appropriate rationale for the study population selection criteria, whether the application provides justification for the exclusion of any group that could be at risk for the disease condition under study. And so these elements are part of the evaluation. They align with guidance from NIH. So many of you may have seen it already in a lot of the clinical trial review panels that exist for NIH. And so we, in general, followed suit there. But we also have, as I mentioned, this broader element of DEI in research. And here we're asking in the application for a description of the research team and how that team is going to incorporate diverse and inclusive perspectives and experience into the implementation of the research project. Again, talking about team composition, the team's track record on valuing and promoting DEI, the allocation of resources and budget to those efforts, and the overall plan to develop a therapy that's ultimately going to serve the unmet needs of the diverse California population. Those elements are going to be evaluated and scored by our grants working group board members. And so we have come up with a scale of 0 to 10 for this element, ranging from not responsive scores between 0 and 2, up to an outstanding response if they are scored a 9 or a 10. And just as a way of giving you an example or a flavor of what we would be looking for in an outstanding response, we would look for something that would have these elements. You know, a project that has assembled a highly qualified and diversified team that has an appropriate budget, adequate resources to maximize outreach and ensure study participation by underserved communities. And I'm just going to emphasize again, this is really focused right now on the clinical program because this is where we're piloting this element. One that has a clear and well-informed understanding of potential barriers to participation in the clinical trial and a robust plan to address them. A project that has a clear understanding of the population in California impacted by the target disease or condition and has a good rationale for that targeted composition of the study population for the trial. And then finally, has an excellent track record of promoting DEI and is highly likely to effectively incorporate those DEI elements into the research project. So that's just by way of example. And finally, one of the last elements that is also included in the application that I'll just speak to briefly is data sharing. Data sharing is an element that we're also wanting to incorporate in all of our application materials and review, simply because we believe that this is a way to maximize the impact of the projects that we fund. Through knowledge sharing and data sharing, we are likely to create more synergy, provide an opportunity for other projects to develop better plans and designs, and hopefully in the long term, get to therapies faster and more efficiently. And so with that in mind, we have been asking applicants to describe the proposed plan that they may have across all of these different funding opportunities, the data that would be generated from the project, and a description of what data would be produced, how it would be managed, what data will be shared and in what way. For example, if a repository will be used that will be available to others, and justification for not sharing some data that may not be shareable, and a timeline and expected costs for doing this. These data sharing plans are going to be evaluated for feasibility, completeness, rationale, for what is or isn't shared, and really for the effort made to meet CIRM's goal of broadening the impact of that CIRM funding. Here, we really are looking for a good faith effort to do more than simply check a box or say, I'm going to publish the data. We want to promote efforts to share to the extent that it's possible to do so, with also allowing for the possibility that there's going to be some data that cannot be shared in order to comply with applicable laws. But for that, I think we would expect to see that in the overall rationale that's presented. And so obviously I can't cover everything. There's a lot in this arena, but I hope that provides at least some overview for you. I just put these links here in terms of other resources. You can find all our program announcements on our public webpage under the Funding Opportunities tab, and application materials for applying to any of these are on our grants management system that's available through the grants.cerm.ca.gov. And so that is it for me, and I will stop sharing this presentation. Thanks, Mitra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zambrano. Next, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lewis, who will be providing a general overview of disbursements and the report schedules and advisory panels. So Jennifer, feel free to share your slides.
Great, thanks, Mitra. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's great to see so many of your faces. I feel like I know all your names and I've spoken to you on the phone, but the benefit of Zoom is we get to see each other even when we're not in the same place. So thank you for being here. I'll provide a brief overview of managing your CIRM award and what happens after the board approves your award for the various stages of opportunities we have open right now.
Sorry to interrupt, Jen. Just wanted to ask if you can swap your
display.
display.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So after ICOC approval, awardees have a specified timeframe to begin activities on a given award. And this varies by the stage of program. So for our clinical stage programs, awardees have 45 days to start the program. And for translation, discovery, and education, 60 days to start the project. And so really that's kind of the time frame that we're working on once the board is approved to launch and execute our contracts. And so during this launch period, the CIRM team of grants management and science officers will be working closely with awardees to establish milestones and disbursements, conduct final budget reviews, and to ensure project readiness for success. So in this next slide, I just wanted to give a high-level overview of what this just-in-time process is. This is all through our electronic grants management portal. During this time, awardees will be required to identify the primary contacts on the award, such as the AOO, FAOO for financial reporting, and anyone who's authorized to sign from the institution. Certification of appropriate protocol approvals, such as IACUC or IRB, certification of acknowledgement of CIRM's regulations, which as it comes to publications, intellectual property, other support documentation for the principal investigator, along with a project manager for our translational and clinical stage awards. Any supporting documentation for the budget regarding the facilities rates, And for awards with a co-funding requirement in our translational and clinical stage awards, verification of cash on hand or verification of the source of funding for that co-funding requirement. And then next, the CIRM team will perform a final budget review and determination of the final contracted award amount. And during that time, we will begin setting milestones. The science officer and grants manager will begin developing milestones that are objective based on the proposed application timeline and milestones in your proposed application. And these will be developed in concert with the awardee prior to issuing a contract. For the education and discovery programs, we like to think of these as project milestones that have a deliverable for discovery of a sufficient progress in a particular area, or for education, verification of enrollment of a particular number of trainees as kind of the project milestone. For translational and clinical awards, we set what we call operational milestones, which I will review a little bit further in the next few slides. But just wanted to give a reminder that our contracts are performance-based, and the project scope cannot be renegotiated once the board has approved your application and the proposed project. So now I'd like to fast forward a little bit and just kind of give an overview of what operational milestones and disbursements mean and what that looks like at CIRM. Again, these are for our clinical and translational stage programs, and are set on objective measures of projects. And so prior to contracting an award, your science officer and grants manager will work together to outline the objective markers of a success for your project and utilize your budget in the application to calculate funds required to get to each of these milestones. And so this is just a high-level example of a $3 million award where we would set possibly 3 milestones of enrollment. So the first milestone, the target would be 33% of patients enrolled, the second 66% enrolled, and then 100% upon completion. And then what will happen is the first disbursement, once we execute the contract, will be made at award launch that will be enough funds to achieve the first milestone target, in this case, 33% enrollment. And once this milestone is achieved, we will then disperse a second tranche of funds to get to the next milestone of 66% enrollment, and so on and so forth as the project progresses. And this just gives you kind of the spectrum of subsequent disbursements to get to that end of the award. But I did want to highlight, so if an awardee experiences a delay in achieving a milestone disbursement, any payments will be, or achieving a milestone, any disbursements will be suspended until that milestone is achieved. So what will happen is the shortfall would need to be covered by the awardee's contingency funds or other co-funding until the milestone is achieved and the next payment is released. And so that's why you will see in the translational and clinical awards a verification of contingency funding in order to make sure projects can assume this funding if needed. But I did want to say that although CIRM suspends payment if there's a delay, our science officers are actively engaged with working with our awardees throughout the entire project. And so they are available to assist with any issues and roadblocks. And one thing I will touch upon in a few slides is our advisory panels for translation and clinical programs that really helps further along projects to achieve these milestones. On the flip side, if a milestone is achieved early and there are savings from a previous disbursement, these funds can be carried forward to further the project towards the next milestone. So CIRM is not going to cut an award or take any money back, but it's there to further along the project and any other budgetary considerations that come up as you move forward in your project. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight that there is a co-funding requirement for our translational and clinical awards that depend on the type of institution or the phase of the project, which are all outlined in our program announcements online. But we do require co-funding as CIRM really sees these awards as a partnership and wants to ensure project success, and that CIRM funding is not fully expended with no source of co-funding that would delay the halt a project and slow down progress to treatments. So our co-funding requirement is continuous throughout the award. And as you'll see here, this is just showing that at each milestone achievement, we will true up that co-funding requirement and ask for verification that has been met in order to ensure that the investment is being partnered throughout the entire lifetime of the award. So now that I've discussed the contract setup and an award is launched, I wanted to just give this kind of high-level overview slide of what reporting requirements are required under a CIRM award. And here is kind of an overview by frequency, by program, and then frequency. And all these reports and all of our communications really can be captured in our grants management portal. So first, we have standard progress reports that include focused updates on where awardees are in achieving milestones that are set out in the contract of the award. But on an annual basis, we also ask for some compliance items, such as verification of where the PI other support is, or verification of protocols in place. But these happen on an annual or semi-annual or quarterly basis, depending on the program type. In addition, there are financial reports that are at a high level to just convey the dollars dispersed, what has been spent to date, and then again, any co-funding commitment and what has been expended towards that. This frequency is on an annual or quarterly basis, depending on the stage of the award. For our translational and clinical awards, there are also operational milestone reports that are submitted upon achievement. And for our education programs, we require all trainees in the program to have an appointment form and to be submitted upon appointment. And both of these operational milestones and training appointment forms really trigger then a disbursement from CIRM upon submission. In addition, the terms of the award require publication, invention, and technology disclosures to CIRM within 60 days of reporting. And I wanted to also share, before I kind of touch on these overall awardee institutional reporting requirements or compliance, that these reports are something that the CIRM team really looks forward to and are a top priority for us. So I just want to say that all the hard work that goes into these reports is something that we really want to hear about your progress and where you are. And it's kind of something that we really look forward to and also gauge ourselves on to make sure we're reviewing them and connecting with you on a very timely basis on follow-up. And then lastly, these two sections here, I just wanted to say that our awardees are also required on an annual basis to, the institutions are required to report any patents or licenses or technologies that result from CIRM-funded research. And additionally, CIRM does have a financial compliance program where we do perform a financial compliance audit twice per year. We randomly select a variety of awardee entities and sample awards. So that is something that may happen during the lifetime of your award as well. And then just a few more slides. I wanted to give a brief overview of the revenue sharing requirement for CIRM awards. Any commercializing entity that sells a product or drug or service arising from CIRM-funded research must pay a royalty on commercial revenue to the state of California's general fund. And per Prop 14, these royalty payments will offset the costs of treatments and cures arising from institute-funded research. And so it's really promoting that access and affordability element. That sharing provisions is a calculation of 0.1% royalty per 1 million in award funds for the earlier 10 years or 9 times the award amount. And There is an option for a loan conversion for clinical stage awardees. This repayment depends on criteria such as the type of award, the stage of research and development, and kind of the therapeutic class at the time of election. But it does eliminate any remaining revenue sharing obligations by the awardee to CIRM. So that's just kind of a high level. There's a lot more to that, obviously, but wanted to give that brief overview for everyone. And then, as I mentioned earlier, CIRM does have an advisory panel program for our clinical and translational projects. And so all clinical and translational projects participate in advisory panels, which are confidential and non-binding. But the goal is really to accelerate projects towards these operational milestones. And so at a high level, this team, this advisory panel team includes the program and the project team, but also the lead science officer, other CIRM team members who are experts across various areas, any external scientific advisors that can help in special areas to further along research and clinical trials, ad hoc specialist advisors, and also importantly, patient advisors who also bring our unique perspective into furthering along the development pipeline. And then lastly, I just wanted to end with a link to our website, but there's a wealth of information in regards to managing your award on our website, from our grants administration policy to some more detail on our regulations, such as the revenue sharing requirements, but also a high level FAQ that answers some of our most frequently asked questions, and some tutorials on how to navigate the grants management system portal. But also, happy to answer questions today, but also at any time, feel free to reach out to myself or the grants management team about anything, current awards and future awards. So Mitra, I think with that, I will stop sharing and hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jen, for that. And now it's really an honor to introduce CIRM's president and CEO, Dr. Maria Milan, who's been working tirelessly on the strategic plan and the development of CIRM's vision beyond 2020. So Dr. Milan, I will share your slides, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mitra. First of all, thank you, Mitra, for organizing this event. I want to thank the California scientific stakeholders. That's why we're having the event today. Immediately after Prop 14 was passed, you reached out, and I hope that today we'll have the opportunity to have that conversation. So much of what I'll be doing now is to really tee up that conversation. I first want to thank my colleagues, Gil Zambrano and Jen Lewis, and of course our chairman, Thomas, for teeing things up and really giving you a lot of information, which I think will be extremely useful. As you can see, CIRM has been open for business since didn't skip many beats between ending Prop 71, the Prop 71 era, and launching into Prop 14 with active program announcements. But you'll see that we are in the midst of strategic planning, which we hope to deliver by the end of the year. So to tee up the discussion that I'd like to have, that we would like to have with you as the California scientific leaders and stakeholders, and although some of you are also attending via webinar, we do want to hear back from you through your Q&A, chat, and feedback. So please, this is the opportunity to connect with all of you. So what first I'll do is provide a brief background of where we are as an agency, provide a broad overview of how we're approaching strategic planning, and then at the end, lead a discussion regarding some key areas and strategic themes, and actually pose questions to you that will inform us in this process. Next slide, please, Mitra. Thank you. So as we're now in the midst of launching Prop 14, it's worthwhile briefly reviewing why we're here, that we were formed by patient advocates and California stakeholders who initially voted for Prop 71 for the $3 billion bond initiative. Under Prop 71, CIRM and Cumulative funded over 1,030 programs across institutions and organizations within California, across 5 pillars that Dr. Zambrano had described to you. and has directly funded more than 71 clinical trials, as well as impacted more than that in terms of early research that eventually then go into clinical trials. And we're here today, of course, because the California citizens voted again for the science, for supporting the cutting edge and innovative science. And we have a wealth of opportunity and possibilities with Prop 14 funding. And now is the time to create the strategy on how to get there. Next slide, please. So just to set up a kind of where we are, CIRM invested across these 5 pillars, and you can see there was substantial investment across all the pillars, with almost $480 million in infrastructure, over $200 million in education programs, almost $1 billion in discovery research, $360 million in translational research, which is a very unique aspect to CIRM funding programs, and almost over $760 million in clinical research. In the final leg of CIRM under the Prop 71 era, we embarked upon a very bold strategic plan between 2016 and 2020. So essentially our strategic plan ended just when we got reauthorized with Prop 14. But what we did by accomplishing this is really validate this model and set up the opportunities under Prop 14. So I'll just review those. We increased the pipeline of candidates going into therapeutic development and added over 50 clinical trials in 5 years. We doubled the number of projects progressing along the development track, going from early discovery to translation, from translation to IND enabling, or from IND enabling into active clinical trials. We actually increased that event rate by 100%. And we were part of a new regulatory paradigm. Many of you may be aware of the 21st Century Cures Act, which provided for an expedited pathway with the FDA, providing for an opportunity to partner with the FDA in the development of these novel regenerative medicine products. CIRM programs were among the first to receive these designations, and currently, I believe there are 9 what's called RMAT designations. I apologize, I have a new puppy. And nobody else at home right now. So these 15% of FDA issued RMAT designations have gone into CIRM programs. IND enabling programs from CIRM, I may have to stop for 1 second, achieved an IND within 2 years in 73% of cases. Mitra, take over for 1 second while I take care of this. I apologize.
No problem. So I can continue. You can see many of the bullets here, but we'll wait till Dr. Milan comes back. So the IND enabling programs had advanced within 2 years, and that was in 73% of those IND stage programs. And with respect to commercialization partnerships, we were able to secure 59% of those late stage programs. And here you are back again.
Great job, Mitra.
I just read over your bullets.
So essentially, when we began the strategic plan, the goal was to increase industry pull because there was not a lot of investment into these types of programs. And today we see over $18 billion worth of partnership events to bring these programs along toward commercialization, with many of our late stage programs with commercialization partners. So what does this mean? Next slide, please. So where we are today is that CIRM has a proven acceleration and de-risking investment model that supports basic translational, clinical research, infrastructure, and education programs. So the idea is to build from the success. We're not going to redo things that work really well, but rather to build upon this. Through 2020, what we did was embark on a strategic planning process, even before Prop 14 was passed, and assembled ourselves to look at 4, I would say, key areas. How do we advance world-class science, build pathways to commercialization, increase equitable patient access to innovative treatments, and continue to maximize their impact through operational excellence. So these were actually work groups that were assembled that looked at a variety of input from workshops, from conferences, from discussions with all of you, with the scientists from experience in our programs, but also through specific workshops, including a neurodegeneration workshop that occurred actually just before 2020, that gave us a lot of kind of direction to continue to pursue. A patient navigation workshop during JP Morgan week in January 2020, before the COVID pandemic hit. And during 2020, during the lockdown, strategic conversations occurred during our ICOC meetings, as well as focus discussions and data sharing led by our board member, Keith Yamamoto, at the Cerm grantee meeting. And then a panel within our Alpha Clinics Network Symposium on diversity, equity, and inclusion and patient advocacy and outreach by our board member, Isabel Duran. After the passage of Prop 14 in November, Chairman Thomas and I assembled a joint scientific strategy advisory panel. Next slide, please, Mitra. And this joint panel was a place where we were able to vet some of the topics that arose during some of those other input opportunities, as well as to just gain some insight from leaders across the spectrum. And you will see, if you posted on our website, who the members were of this advisory panel. But it's a very august group spanning across leaders of academic institutions, national academies, NIH, and so forth. And some key lessons came out of that. There was support for the idea of a consortium model to leverage shared knowledge networks, either within disease areas or across, that could provide linkages among shared biological mechanisms and pathways. The panel felt that CIRM was well positioned to build upon and utilize both our past investments as well as our lessons learned to enable these consortia, utilize knowledge learned as well as the opportunity to expand our Alpha Clinics network, for instance, as well as our lessons learned and opportunities with things such as our genomics data hub and our iPSC bank. A consortium would utilize, develop, and be formed around these knowledge networks and these shared labs and competency hubs. So just in general, there was a great support for creation of a knowledge network. There was also an acknowledgement that there are quite a few challenges to this. However, there is an opportunity proactively, if this is designed from the beginning, to create standardized data collection, handling, and tackle some of the challenges regarding ownership, consent, et cetera. There was also mention of the opportunity for CIRM to be a leader in creation of international patient registry and data repositories for long-term follow-up and longitudinal follow-up, both from clinical data sets as well as other data sets from patients who had received cell and gene therapy. As mentioned in the beginning, there is a provision for funding of what's called shared labs, but even an expansion of this is the idea of competency hubs that could enable the research ecosystem by providing high quality standardized approaches, tools, biologic resources to enable basic as well as translational and later stage research. And would also provide specialized and costly technology that wouldn't be otherwise available to researchers. Many times we have seen that has posed a barrier to some investigators not being able to incorporate either specific readouts within their clinical trials or some helpful tools and strategies in their earlier stage programs because it's not readily available. And so this built into a research model would provide the opportunity for those researchers to be able to access those valuable tools. Other examples included specialized offerings such as in gene editing and gene therapy. So for instance, CRISPR-Cas9 cores, validation cores, some shared resources regarding cell models, iPSCs cores, or organoid, et cetera, or even shared resources for vector production and some kind of in a pre-competitive fashion, be able to have some validated resources that could be utilized not just by one group, but across groups and not compromise programs. So these were all discussed at that meeting. They were ideas that we had also been entertaining through our other input sessions. And then in terms of education and workforce development, this is absolutely critical. There's great support for this. CIRM already is building upon a very successful education program with our Bridges program for our undergraduate and master's level students, but also Spark and high school students. We got extremely strong support, not only for building that, but additional opportunities in this arena, as well as this would be another area where we could build diversity and inclusion into it, because after all, the workforce, the caregivers, those who are developing and doing this research, if that's already embedded from the beginning, there's more likelihood we will success in actually creating this systemic change in how we approach research and really target the broader population. And so next slide, please, Mitra. What we didn't tackle at that meeting, because it was just such a big topic on its own, was a major hurdle to how we get these scientific discoveries through translation. And then even when you have early stage clinical proof of concept and strong data sets, you could still be held up and it could still not make it out there. And it's process development and manufacturing. And so our group, led by our BD team, assembled a very robust discussion at a CIRM manufacturing workshop in April, representation both from academia, industry, and other parties. And the major messaging from this is that there's an opportunity to empower academic innovators to adopt quality by design, and manufacturing best practices from the beginning. This will overcome some of the hurdles and the pitfalls that often our programs may hit if they're successful in an academic setting, but not able to transfer out to a commercial setting. Enable competency hubs in manufacturing as well, and GMP manufacturing centers of excellence. We do have quite a few resources around California. The idea is how can we empower those manufacturing resources to capitalize on some of the best practices and potential public-private partnership networks with industry players who are very, very interested, not only interested, are very invested in being able to more meaningfully engage with the academic groups earlier on. And then another important aspect, and this kind of links across the programs, is to leverage CIRM education programs and this network to build faster on-ramps for manufacturing career pathways. So education, and you'll hear in a little bit, in the arena of manufacturing is something that is considered of high value and much needed. Next slide, please. So that's just an intro. What I'd like to do today is discuss these topic areas, and I'll name them now, but I'll take a pause because we actually have some input from you already that I'd like Mitra to share, and we'll come back to these topic areas after she shares that, so we can have a discussion of the following areas. We are in the midst of expanding our programs in discovery research. Gil had presented the open program announcements for candidate discovery, but we're talking about basic science discovery programs. Since Prop 14 calls for genetic research, we would very much welcome your insight and your input in terms of where you think the opportunities are, where CIRM is uniquely positioned to bring this field forward, and what areas of genetic research. Consortia and Knowledge Network, as mentioned, as a mechanism or a vehicle for or model for really leveraging and making the most impact of the research we fund. We feel that the CNS is a first use case would make sense given a specific set aside. We would like to do that without compromising research opportunities. So for those that don't necessarily neatly fit into a consortium, we wouldn't compromise that. But given that, we'd love to hear your ideas in terms of what's the best construct to consortia. Education workforce development, of course, in broad terms, we'd love your input on that. And we would also like to discuss what are the high value and much needed competency hubs or shared resources that could enable the research overall, but also the consortia model. And then input regarding your thoughts on the manufacturing public-private partnership, especially those of you who are involved in academic GMP. And then, of course, there's patient access, which relates to the clinical care delivery via the expansion of the Alpha Clinics network and establishment of community care centers of excellence, which will be something that is still in that's currently still in development. It's envisioned it will be connected to our academic centers, and any input into that would be welcome. The affordability and access question, we'd like to table that for now because the affordability and access working group is being assembled. But of course, at this, even if there's input at this time, we welcome that. Now I'll take a brief pause to let Mitra give her time to present what we have so far from the surveys. And please, those of you who are attending today, if you would please take the time to fill out a survey if you haven't done it. It's very informative for us. All right, Mitra, you're on for a little bit.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I'm going to make this very quick because I really want to give you guys an opportunity to talk to us a little bit more. These surveys were circulated just a week ago to everyone, all the participants here. We've only received a subset of the results. So these are preliminary and super top line, and we're going to recirculate the link today and hoping to get more input from you so that we can better assess your needs. But I did want to tell you that so far, just in the past week, we've received 76 responses. And of those, the majority, as you can see, have been from nonprofit and academic centers, medical or research, as well as education leaders, those who are within the Cal State or community college system and other teaching academic institutions. And based on your responses, some of our top line preliminary results so far have been that it appears there are a set of diverse resources that have been identified so far, and I don't want to bias those of you who haven't taken the survey yet to think about them. So we won't get into too much detail, but there are potential future shared lab resources identified and resources identified for acceleration of research. And one of the interesting insights was that the use of shared labs by neighboring institutions could further be enhanced. And that's a great opportunity for CIRM, in fact. In terms of manufacturing, we've also learned a number of different critical areas of resources and education that are needed by you. Some of the top, the top tiers of those were development of partnerships with CDMOs, as well as development of workforce training programs, and of course, many others that were indicated as well. With respect to knowledge networks, you have so far identified several diverse barriers to data sharing. Some of the, again, top line factors have been lack of data harmonization, IP and licensure, and the fear of being scooped, which is not surprising. And again, this really provides a lot of opportunity where CIRM could potentially help to mitigate some of these barriers. With respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion, also, there have been several barriers. Some of those include difficulty of DEI integration into non-clinical research and limited access and outreach to diverse communities, which we're hoping with the new strategic direction will be some of the things that we can address. When it comes to education and workforce development, this was really interesting for me personally. It was insightful to see that there was very high interest in education and training in science communication, manufacturing, and clinical research. So these can all be potential future areas that can be further expanded or enhanced through workforce development. And finally, with respect to partnerships, we found that 50% of for-profit institutions who don't have existing partnerships for workforce development are interested in launching them. And when I say that, that means that the other 50% have existing internship programs. It's not that they're not interested in it, it's just that they already have something in place. And by the same token, advocacy organizations have also expressed a lot of interest in forming MOUs. And all of this really suggests that there is a lot of interest for these partnerships, which we're hoping to build over the course of the next few years. So these are, like I said, just some top line results and very preliminary. I'm going to share this again at the very end and make sure to, I noticed that our chat is off, but I'm going to find a way to either email you the link again, or you can hold your phone or tablet over the QR code if you're using your phone to access the survey. And we would love to hear more from you about that. I'll share this again at the very end. But I just wanted to now transition over to our open forum. Just very quickly, as a reminder again, for those of you who are joining through the webinar, feel free to continue using Q&A. And if you're joining with audio and video, please feel free to raise your hands and we will take questions and comments in the order in which they appear. And I think everybody knows how to use the raise hand tool, but just in case, these are just some quick screenshots if you're using it by phone or your desktop. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Milan's last slide in case any of these are good refreshers. I'll stop sharing my screen at this point so that we can also see everyone as they raise their hand.
Actually, Mitra, could you leave this up so that we could have it as a reference point?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, so let me bring up the questions. Steve Peckman.
Thanks, Mitra, and everyone at CIRM. This was a real wonderful idea to have the town hall. My question is about discovery and basic science research and the mandated research areas described in Prop 14. So there's a need for true discovery or fundamental research just as much today as it was true back in 2005 when CIRM started. And principally research to address the critical knowledge gaps, to increase our understanding of the cell basis, if any, and ultimately identify possible target cells to develop future treatments for neuropsychiatric diseases, such as depression and schizophrenia that Chairman Thomas highlighted earlier, which are directly indicated as target diseases in Prop 14. So my point is that there is very little known about the mechanisms of these diseases, and it's important to address questions using genetic tools without directly connecting to a known therapeutic, which is typically required now for CIRM basic research grants. So instead, we need grants that will enhance later research that will inform a therapeutic pipeline. So will the future basic research RFAs allow for such research?
So Steve, thank you for that question. And I think that that is what distinguishes this discovery RFA from our current discovery RFA that's open to DIS2, is that the RFA that's being developed right now is intended to be basic science, and it won't necessarily give rise to a development candidate. It will not necessarily do even research on a discovery candidate per se, but elucidate basic mechanistic, basic mechanism, et cetera, that will enable the future discovery for therapeutics.
That's great, because that will feed the future CIRM pipeline of potential therapeutics as well by building that basic knowledge.
Thank you, Steve. And then if you and your UCLA colleagues could also provide us with what your understanding of opportunities in genetic research are, that's also another, whether it be tools or whatever in regard to basic research. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Nicole.
A couple of questions. One had to do with my disappointment that that one of the CSU faculty did not get appointed on the board, because I can just remember that was part of what was in the original documents, that the new board members would include definitely somebody from the CSU world. And I don't understand why that did not take place. My other question statement has to do with the workforce development. Are there going to be other RFAs that will be put forth regarding putting together workforce development training pathways, or how does CIRM envision that part? I mean, we are part of this, I'm part of the CIRM Bridges, of course, program. This is a natural next kind of development, and I'm really happy to see that that CIRM is very much interested and supportive of putting forth new educational areas. But is that just something that has not been worked out yet, or are you waiting for people to inquire about them? What is the process?
So Maria, I'll
May
take
I go
that.
ahead? Yeah, I'd like to defer the first question to Chairman Thomas about the CSU appointment, and then I'll answer the next one. Thank you.
So Nicole, thank you very much for your questions. As you've read in the proposition with respect to the 6 new board members that were to be appointed, there were very narrow definitions of those 6. And as I said earlier, 2 were from a couple of specific UCs, 2 were nurses, and 2 were additional mental health patient advocates. And so the new appointments that have been made to the board conform to those definitions of what entities are eligible from which to choose from for those positions, and that is what we've done. And the language of the proposition is very precise, and we don't have a lot of leeway to venture from that.
Okay, thank you.
And then regarding your next question, Nicole, we are taking input that was discussed at a variety of meetings regarding, what is, and including the survey that Mitra had shared, areas that the scientific community feel that there's a need for workforce development is in manufacturing, data science, communication, and I forgot what the other places were, but the idea is that the Bridges program and other programs serve as a great starting point to be able to relate to some of these opportunities, either as part of other initiatives. So one can imagine, let's say the education component is part of a manufacturing public-private partnership. That would be an opportunity to expand the manufacturing training and potential certification programs in partnership with Bridges programs as well as other California institutions. Just as one example that's been discussed actually in some format at the manufacturing workshop.
Okay, so for me to understand it correctly, so there will be some RFA regarding that?
It'll be either a separate RFA or be probably a component of another RFA. But the thing is, I would just like to say that until we roll out the strategic plan, these new concepts, will really not. So the process is an overall strategic plan. Attached to that are the how-tos and how to get that done. And the how-tos for us are concept proposals that then relate to an RFA. So that is downstream from the strategic plan rollout at the end of the year. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. Dennis?
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Denis Evsenko, and I represent USC. I have a question that relates to expansion of RFAs. So CIRM is making an exception for gene therapy products. They don't need to target directly stem cells as long as those therapies have regenerative potential. So my question is why this exception is not given to small molecules, because they appear to be at least equally efficacious in this regard. And there are multiple therapies, potential therapies in pipeline that can actually stimulate regeneration without targeting stem cells directly. And I think this actually question also feeds into the last box, patient access, because small molecule based therapies are much, much more affordable. So can you please comment on that, if CIRM plans to change this requirement for direct stem cell targeting when it comes to small molecules? Thank you.
I think that in terms of the small molecule scope, Gil could respond to that, but it sounds like you know the scope of what small molecules can be funded for by CIRM. Regarding just small molecule for regenerative potential that is not directly linked to a stem cell, that is a topic that has been brought up. It was brought up at the strategic advisory panel, and the concern that was brought up is that yes, there may be areas that would be where that would be valuable. However, there are other mechanisms by which those type of projects could be funded, because small molecules are, in terms of the discovery pathways and the platforms, those are more established. And the idea is that CIRM, despite having $5.5 billion, it's still a limited funds. So the intent is to fund those programs that are kind of higher risk, high reward, but there's really not as much of an established mechanism for doing it. I'm not saying that it's something that will always be ineligible for funding. It's still under discussion. And there are opportunities. That's why there's this component of Prop 14 that talks about vital research opportunities. So if there's a strong case that's made, that is the way that the board can have, it would be brought to the board, and they would have a look as to whether it is a vital research opportunity to be able to fund another class of approaches that are currently not in scope. But thank you for your question, and that's at this time is aside from what's in scope according to what's stated in the RFAs, we're not intending to open up the floodgates to all small molecules at the risk of not being able to fund kind of the less established high risk, high reward cell and gene therapy type programs.
Thank you, Maria. Eileen.
So I have a couple of questions, but I won't necessarily ask them all at once. One comment that I have, just following up quickly on Steve Peckman's ask about discovery-based research as it pertains to neuroscience in particular. is that the term of awards that CIRM has traditionally made for discovery research, and even for the DISC-2s or the early trans, is sometimes not particularly friendly for neuroscience-based projects that require complex animal models, may require potentially long-term breeding schemes, could require aging, for example, into mature animals. And that makes meeting CIRM awards very challenging for some investigators operating in that domain. And so my comment sort of question is whether CIRM is going to consider this in terms of really moving particularly CNS related research forward in the context of stem cell and regenerative medicine therapies. So I'll ask that one and then I'll come back and raise my hand again for the others so that you're sure to be getting people through queue.
Eileen, can you please so do you feel that the term of the awards, the length of the awards is not sufficient to conduct that?
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. So unless you come in with a very small scope project, right, that is, potentially very far along in terms of development, something that's on a 24-month clock for a lot of CNS related research, if it's going to involve an animal model, and sometimes, as I've said, these very complex animal models, 24 months is an incredibly compressed time frame to have a group have the potential to be successful, both in terms of review and of course, in terms of targeting something that's going to meet a standard set of CIRM milestones for what's going to be considered successful as a project.
Thank you for that input. Gil, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry. I apologize. I was answering a question on the
yeah, the question.
Q&A.
Eileen is saying that the term of the discovery, the classic discovery awards from CIRM are too short for basic discovery research.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
and yes, no, we recognize that because the goal of the candidate discovery is really to feed the pipeline, and so there the goal is to try to get it there as quickly as possible. But we recognize that for mechanistic and kind of knowledge development will require more time. And as we think of the RFA or the opportunity for that, that is being taken into account. So appreciate that question.
And can I just circle back one bit to make sure it doesn't get lost in the discussion, right? Particularly in the case of CNS, right? Even for the later stage discovery or the TRAN grants, again, because of the issue of the complex animal models that are required in order to even get towards some candidate validation, those terms of awards make for such a compressed project timeline that my concern is you're going to drive a lot of things to failure, particularly for CNS. And this time around with Prop 14, that becomes really critical in terms of the type of investment that's being made. So I think it's important to put some thought there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that input, Eileen. Bruce.
Hi, this is Bruce Conklin, and I'm at Gladstone and also UCSF. And the question I had was, I really enjoyed Maria Milan's talk about Prop 71 and all the different the different the types of programs and how much money was in each. And one of the features of that actually was also there were time constraints about when the money for a building was going to be awarded, and then actually a building was started. And I was trying to figure out whether or not there were similar sorts of either deadlines and constraints early on in terms of how much money goes to which pillar of that in the Prop 14, because I don't, it seems like there's more flexibility with respect to the strategic plan, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there are like specific timelines for specific parts of the funding to be released and spent.
Thank you, Bruce. Jen Lewis and I were just talking about this, so I know she has some information. There are some programs that have time guidelines to it. So Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you to share which ones do.
Sure. So the proposition provides a maximum allocation per year for CIRM that we can spend per year. But in terms of the program specific funds, the only program that has a time limit to it is the shared labs component. There is 0.05% of the bond funds is towards shared labs, and those need to be operational within 5 years. And so that is something that we are aware of and thinking of the timing of when to release that kind of concept and getting enough time for projects to get up and running and operationalized. But that's the only time component to a program specific item.
So that's a significant departure from Prop 71 in a sense.
That's the only it is, because it's less than some of the initial restrictions that were on at the beginning. Yes.
And just Bruce, a couple of things. There are no major facilities. There's no major facilities type of building in this proposition, whereas there was in Prop 71. There are some provisions for it that are related to the shared labs, for instance, a budget that's related to enabling that, but there's no major facilities in building, these the labs as was done with Prop 71.
Great, thanks.
Arnold.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Arnold Quickstein here from UCSF. Among other things, I was curious about whether there are the kind of limitations along the lines of what Bruce just asked that were present in Prop 71 for different categories of award. The facilities awards were capped, shared facilities were capped, some of the training or even career development awards that were offered back then were capped. And I know there's nothing written into Prop 14 about most of that, but in your strategic plan, are you thinking about some kind of capping, or either time-wise or in terms of total amount of funding?
That is a very loaded question, Arnold, but I'll try to, let me give you a response and see if it starts to get at this. So in addition to just strategic planning and creating our strategic priorities and kind of those components, what we're also doing with our finance team and our budget team is looking kind of at the operational funds that are available, as well as the research funds that are available over time, with the guidelines that Jennifer had shared in terms of the max allowable expenditures each year. Generally, it's modeled on a 10-year timeline, but we know that Prop 71, for instance, went 5 years or 6 years beyond that timeline. In any case, we're working with that. And one of the things that we are doing is proactively ensuring that there's enough in all the major pillars. So there's, we call them the pillars, and then there's the special programs, right? The pillars that include basic, research, discovery, translational, clinical, the pillars, that there's enough in there that all of those programs will carry through to the life of CIRM, Prop 14 CIRM. So that's one piece. In terms of award caps, that's really dictated by the nature of that program announcement. Again, that is something that goes through the process of a concept. And then in the concept, when we build budgets, we bring in data to kind of inform what's right size for the types of programs. And then that's built in, and those are how award caps are created. It's something that is worked on with our board subcommittees, and then finally approval by our board. So that's a general process that's going to be followed in crafting the budgets and awards and award caps.
I just have one other unrelated question because the categories that you discussed today were very helpful, but I noticed there was no discussion of ethical issues. You know, the stem cell field has been plagued with a variety of different ethical and policy issues over time. And does CIRM have a committee of some sort, a standing committee, or are you planning to have something that will address ethical issues as they come up?
So I have Jeff Lomax, who's on the line here, as well as Maria Bonneville. Maria Bonneville is our VP of governance, and she helps coordinate our subcommittees and our working groups. And then Jeff Lomax, who's our policy, our single designated policy person within CIRM, has been managing our standards working group, which does deal with those types of issues. Arnold, so Jeff may want to say a word, Maria may want to say a word, and then on top of that, there is going to be this whole new group that we were talking about that relates to accessibility and affordability, and we'll build in all those aspects of clinical research, clinical delivery, access and affordability, and all of the policy related to that. So maybe if I could have Jeff just give an update on the standards working group, the scope of what that group does, and what what stage we're in with this, with the relaunch.
Yeah, thank you, Maria, and thank you, Dr. Kriegstein, for that question. As you may recall, we have a medical and ethical standards working group. It's mandated in the ballot measure, both the original and Proposition 14. And we're currently in the process of reconstituting that group. We have to reconstitute in part because of the amount of time that's passed. We have to recruit new members. And then as a first step, we will be reviewing the existing standards in light of developments in the field. So timeline is looking like late this year, early next year. And as always, we will make our stakeholders aware and look forward to everyone's participation.
It looks like there's a hand up from the attendees, but I don't know if we're able to.
Yeah, I don't think we have any audio from them. So if I do see your hand, but if you could put your question in the Q&A box, we'll try and announce it live. But let's go to Yang.
Thank you. Thank you for all the presenters. Really, this is very helpful. My name is Yang Chen. I represent USC. I have a question related to workforce development. Under Prop 71, there was support for junior faculty career development. And is that going to be available under the Prop 14 support? And I think that's an opportunity also. You can tie that together with the diversity and inclusion in terms of developing the workforce. I wanted to hear comments on that.
So in terms of the prior career development, I think there was there were a couple of them. One of them was I forgot what it was, what it was called, but it was for young faculty. It was like early faculty, I think. Then there was
junior faculty career development.
Faculty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the concept, in the strategic plan development, the idea behind workforce development is to create on-ramps at various stages in education and career development. We have not yet discussed a specific faculty development award per se, but there are discussions. We're starting off kind of with the earlier stage programs. We just re-upped our Bridges program for undergraduate and our Spark program for high school. There's another undergraduate training program that's under development. The Research Fellows, which is a postdoc training program, is used to be called the Cerm Scholar program. That's active. And then we're discussing the best way to promote and not promote, but to support and hopefully get them promoted early stage faculty, as well as promoting mentorship opportunities and incentives. But we don't have anything concrete to share with you. So your input in terms of highlighting the importance of that is appreciated. Thank you.
yeah, if you put together like working groups to talk about, to discuss this, we'll be happy to help out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yang. Eileen, let's come back to you.
So jumping topics, just slightly, I wanted to ask what the current thinking is in terms of institutional matching funds. So I'm thinking here particularly, for example, of the ASCC bridge funds that there's a current call out for, right? And so all the ASCCs will be putting in for this. There's an institutional commitment match that's been required for those. This is going to be challenging probably for some of the public research institutions to meet going forward. We certainly need to know a lot about what that's going to look like in the long haul. And so I wanted to get a sense of whether there have been discussions or whether there has been discussion with the working group and the board about what that might look like and if it's going to be maintained as a requirement for any of the grant components. I'm not talking about contingency funds, right? But for any of the initiatives going forward, particularly the ASCCs.
Eileen, I think you may recall that when our team presented to the board the proposal to provide bridge funding for the Alpha clinics, which is ASCC. Some new CIRM team members were asking us to explain what these acronyms were. Alpha stem cell clinics. The board did indicate that they felt that co-funding by the institution was important, for the bridge funding, because the original Alpha clinics RFA called for institutional commitment to ensuring that this is a sustainable infrastructure that's created within California, without having an actual concrete answer yet, because we have not presented and we don't have anything in later stages yet, but it's being worked on. I would envision that the board would still be very much inclined to require it, because even with Prop 14, the idea is that we can't count on CIRM being here forever to renew the funds. So we would want to create sustainable infrastructure and making sure that we have the commitment from the institution to do that. So the matching funds are generally the skin in the game that the board is asked.
So if I could just comment then there, I think the concept of having skin in the game, I completely agree with. It's an important one. I think everyone is going to be on board with that. I think the caution that I would suggest, and of course you're going to want to listen to your ASCC directors very carefully, is whether there's a concern, I have a concern about creating a situation where you have a disparity between some of the large privates within California and the UCs in that regard. And again, I think this is an area that CIRM ought to be looking at quite closely and having a careful think about before there's a mandated across the board that goes into place. Sustainability being the important critical goal, I completely agree with it, but I think that's got to have a careful think behind it.
Appreciate that input, Eileen.
Bruce.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question regarding that. I agree that new faculty issues are really important to address, but also there in Prop 71 there was also this program for recruiting faculty from outside of California, and I think that there are some really pretty great recruits that happened during that time, and it was really an opportunity to go outside of California and bring people in. And I don't know whether that is at all being considered. I don't see it specifically. So
Bruce, I think that we're going to have a look back to see. I know that there were these research leaders. I'm forgetting the name of the award, where essentially very accomplished, highly recognized experts were recruited under one type of award. So we'll have to take a look at that. Right now, we don't have anything lined up that has told us that that is something that should be prioritized. The opportunity to have this type of funding within California, I think, is seen as a very powerful asset for institutions to be able to recruit faculty to California. And if there's this, I think that we'd have to make a very strong case for why some of the research funds would go toward bringing in already very well established investigators at this stage in the field. Earlier on, I think one of the rationale was that you're building a field, and so you want to make sure that you kind of have enough expertise within California. And so I think that we'd have to have a similar type of strong rationale for something like that. But if there is kind of strong rationale, we'd like to hear that, because we're here to get your input and also to test our assumptions as well.
Since we have the time, I actually wanted to go to one of the questions, or actually a couple of questions that were asked in the chat about manufacturing, and I don't know the extent to which you're going to be able to comment, Maria, on specifics about how the partnership is going to be made for manufacturing and helping institutions or helping researchers. But if you can say anything about what we're going to be doing to help researchers with their manufacturing process.
If you could back up in the slide deck, Mitra, to the
Sure.
manufacturing workshop summary.
Sorry. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so the kind of the approach that we're looking at does take the input or the output from that manufacturing workshop very seriously. We're looking at it both from how we can enable this, both from how we construct our research opportunities, our funding, how we fund what we fund at the translational stage and beyond, but also how we can enable the GMP manufacturing centers to be more prepared to make that leap from those programs going toward a commercialization partner, as well as other types of models, the classic commercialization model, as well as some other ones that have been raised, especially for rare disease and gene therapy. So I don't have any specific, we do have specific things we're looking at, but it's not ready for prime time. There will be a concept that is currently under development that will be brought to the board at the end, in the Q4 of this year, most likely, that will be teed up along with the strategic plan. So I do want to, and then Steve Peckman's here, but Mitra, if you can go back to that other slide of topics, I really would love to get input from this group in terms of some of the questions that are laid out in these areas, after Steve asks his question.
And go for it, Steve.
Thank you, Maria. I think the central manufacturing concern is a real important one. And the question about it, I think, is that though it may be very helpful for some investigators, I think that CIRM should be very careful as a funding agency that the centralizing process of manufacturing does not thwart creativity. Because part of the actual result of centralizing requirements is that people start to push product into a specific bucket of how it's done. And it may actually diminish creative answers to a lot of problems that are vexing the area at this point. So I think it's going to be a delicate balance that CIRM will have to address.
Right, Steve, and we completely agree. So I just want to reassure you that we're not being unrealistic in thinking that things are ready to be standardized to that extent. It's about enabling the community to organically arrive at that, facilitated by industry expertise as well. I know that sounds really abstract, but stay tuned. Q4, you should have a little bit more detail and it'll hopefully start to make sense. I would love to get your input in terms of these two areas specifically. If the only things we had to cover were genetic research and consortia and what you think about CNS consortia and where we are in neuropsychiatric research and how does this fit into a consortia model, love to get your input into that. And then of course, as a bonus, if anybody wants to, kind of put forward what they believe are critical shared resources, shared labs, competency hubs, that'd be great.
Daniela.
So I think, Maria, that CNS is the perfect first use case. And the reason for that is because there are a number of efforts that are taking place in the field. As you have mentioned before, we had the great opportunity to meet with the people in neurodegeneration. I also personally believe that neuropsychiatric illnesses are an area that are so tremendously important at this time, especially in the current conditions as we are recovering from a very serious stressors. It spreads also on the level of diversity and inclusion. So I don't see how we could go wrong on concentrating on one of those topics. I think the CNS topic as a general is too broad. As a neurologist, neuroscientist, I do not see how we're going to do everything from multiple sclerosis to schizophrenia at the same time. But focusing some high areas of interest is going to be essential. Now, I think it's also going to be essential to try to find out where we are with the research and understanding on those areas. Some of them will be still at the level maybe of basic and translational, disc and trans consortia, while some of them are already primed for alpha stem cell clinic and clinical research.
Thank you, Daniela. And then, we have additional hands up and I have a follow-up question if we have a chance after that. Thank you, Mitra.
Or yes, Steve and then Arnold. Please go ahead.
So I want to second what Daniela said in response to the question, but also add that like manufacturing, I think that consortia should be incentivized, but not overly weighted. Again, I think that creativity happens in a lot of different ways in the sciences, and to mandate consortia with certain types of RFAs, either at early, mid, or clinical stages, could actually thwart a lot of processes that are important. So again, consortia are important, but need to be weighted. The other thing, I just wanted to add one more comment, and that's to support Eileen's suggestion about the overly restrictive timelines on some of the grants. Whether it's neuro research or other research, that I think that it would behoove CIRM's success to build flexibility in the timelines for grants based on the proposal rather than arbitrary timelines that one size fits all. And clearly you're going to need some kind of framework in which to judge these things, but to provide you and the investigators more flexibility based on the types of research that they are proposing will help people actually accomplish the goal.
Thank you, Steve. I'll go directly to Arnold and then turn it back over to Maria.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would just answer your question, at least in my own view, in terms of consortia knowledge networks when it comes to CNS diseases. The problem is that we, especially for mental diseases that you've mentioned, in neuropsychiatric and neurodevelopmental realms, we have no real understanding of the mechanism for most of these diseases. And so it really gets down to very basic research that would need, to open this field up. And in that regard, I think it reminds me of what the strategic plan initially was for CIRM after Prop 71. And that was a disease team and also basic discovery team networks that were going to be developed for the 10 years of the program. And the disease team concept stayed, but the idea of a basic science disease team apparently wasn't funded, or at least it didn't survive the reevaluation of the strategic plan. And I would suggest that for these neuropsychiatric disorders in particular, neurodevelopmental diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, in fact, that multiple investigator networks, kind of a disease team, but tackling these problems at a very basic science level is probably where this should begin. And those multi-PI investigator teams would need to be funded for reasonable length of time, 5 years, perhaps renewable if they meet certain goals. So in my view, that kind of approach to these CNS problem diseases is probably a good place to start, or at least incorporate into your thinking.
Thank you so much. So if it's okay, just I have a question to all of you who have commented on that specific topic. So I specifically put it up here, mega consortium versus broad categories versus disease specific. It seems that there's, at least as a starting point, there's a feeling that disease specific consortia may make the most sense. And then those could be interlinked because there are some kind of shared resources such as genomics, omics tools, or models, etc., that could be used by all these disease consortia itself. Am I reading that correctly? Does that seem like the most logical, structure to such a thing?
Daniela, please go ahead.
I would suggest, Maria, that we think a little bit broader than single disease. And we are thinking a little bit less broad as neurodegeneration. So maybe thinking at the level of disease-oriented teams and taking one type of disorders like neuroinflammation, by example, just to be a little bit more specific, and then building tools around that, because neuroscience, as we all know, it's very, very diverse, and I don't think that we'll be able to create 200 different teams for 200 different diseases or more. So just keep the team, but not be as specific as disease by disease.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Daniela.
And I think Eileen also has a response to that. Eileen, you're on mute.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you. I would just second Daniela's comments quickly. I think we're, as usual, very much on the same page with this. And the other piece I would point out in terms of thinking about teams is one might have certain situations where you would sort of organize backwards, right? A therapeutic approach around, I don't know, microglial transplantation derived from stem cells or things like that, where it would make sense to say that that type of manipulation could be useful for a series of potential disease targets or neurodisease targets, right? And then your consortia would grow out of a common approach as opposed to a common disease.
I think we could make this puzzle work somehow. It's almost like those, what are those things that they had, those little circles and you put sticks in and then you have like the little sticks and I forgot what those things were called. But this is very helpful because there are, as you know, this is also linked to this idea of shared hubs and shared competency hubs, and that those could service across the different teams as well. And that's kind of how you create the knowledge network, is that although there's, goal-oriented or, objective-oriented, whether it be thematic or disease based, that just by being able to have the standards in terms of how data is collected or resources are utilized and information is shared, that in itself creates the mega, it's a virtual mega consortium. So thank you for that input. It really does help, put a little bit more of a finer point to some of the things we're thinking about.
Why don't we take John's comment or question as well and make that our last one?
Thanks. I just want to comment on Maria's manufacturing public and private partnership issues, because what's happening right now in the last 6 months, where millions of people have received the delivery of gene therapy, the form of a COVID vaccine, means that the whole field is changing very rapidly. And it's in the private domain that a lot of technology exists. This week's New England Journal shows that you can actually deliver specifically for amyloidosis a CRISPR. And I think we're going to see then in the next couple of years, tremendous use of synthetic delivery systems. And it'll be applied to the CNS consortiums just as well as anything else. So I think that CIRM must be cognizant of this. And it may even have put pressure on some systems that are using older methods. You know, let's face it, even lentiviral may become obsolete. AAV may become obsolete. We're in a real revolution right now. And I think that's going to be an important issue in the next few years for CIRM.
As a matter of fact, Dr. Zaya, our new VP of Science Programs, Rosa, who's, I think she's on the attendee, not on the panelist here, had raised that very same issue. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Maria, any final words from you before we finish the meeting?
Well, I wanted to say thank you again. I hope that that you got as much information as we got from you. It was really great to have this opportunity to hear from you directly, and we look forward to you know, everything that lies ahead. I do believe that we're not too far off in terms of how we're viewing things, but you did give us some really tangible, you know, considerations to take into account. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
And just to echo that, again, the responses that those of you who have given us through the survey has been immensely insightful. And if you haven't had a chance to fill that survey out, again, I greatly appreciate it if you do. And I just wanted to put up that slide one more time in case you can use your phone to at least pull up the survey, but we will email the link out after this meeting so that you have it, and would greatly appreciate your feedback, because as you heard from Dr. Milan, we want to know what you're thinking, and your needs are important for the direction of the agency. So with that, I wanted to thank all. Yeah.
Can I just make one last statement?
Of course, of course.
And again, thank you all so much for participating and for all that you do to advance the mission. I wanted to sort of end with a special shout out to Bob Klein and everybody at Americans for Cures for bringing the issue back to the ballot and making this happen. And just to let everybody know that Bob, Danielle, and his son Rob all received National Leadership Awards from the World Stem Cell Summit, which just concluded last week. So thank you to Bob, Danielle, and Rob. Special additional shout out to Senator Torres, who in his spare time added his many years of expertise in advising the campaign on various elements of the election itself. And so thank you, Art. But lastly, just to reiterate what everybody already knows, which is by virtue of all the tremendous work that all of you do, California is the envy of the scientific world in the regenerative medicine space. And we all feel so privileged at CIRM to be able to be a part of this overall effort, and look forward greatly to seeing what's coming down the road. So thank you again.
And not to get the last word in, but I will. I wanted to also thank Mitra Ushman, who was the scientific director for Americans for Cures. And we're so fortunate that she's here as our head of, as our senior science officer, special projects and strategic initiatives. We give her a very long title because she's spectacular. Thank you very much for getting this together. And also, I do want to echo what JT said, and it's true. We wouldn't be able to embark on these bold, sometimes, you know, people look at us and they're so jealous because we talk about doing these things. the Scientific Strategy Advisory Panel, I think we're so animated and engaged because they just are so energized by the fact that we actually could do the things that we're talking about. And we're able to do that because of the talent that's here in California, because of your leadership, your scientific leadership and your vision. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Milan. And I stand on the shoulders of many great people. So thank you all. I couldn't agree with Chairman Thomas and Dr. Milan more about the role that Bob Klein has played, but obviously I'm highly biased. But it is an absolute honor to be here, to now continue this work and this momentum. Thank you all so much for everything that you're doing. We look forward to continuing these conversations with you, and we'll be in touch. If there are follow-up matters that we need to discuss with you individually, we will certainly reach out. Thank you for your time today, all your input, and to those of you who joined via the webinar, I just wanted to echo again that we will circle back. I think a lot of the questions were actually answered by our amazing CIRM staff, but we will put all of this together, compiled, and circulate the answers to the questions regardless to everyone so that you have them. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to perhaps doing this again with you in the future.
Thank you, Mitra. The puppies.
Thank you.
Now.
Just in time.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye, everyone.